Welcome to our program, Asia in Focus, Clean Water and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. My name is Sean Lees and I work for the United Nations Development Program, Asia Pacific. In partnership with the European Union, UNDP is hosting a series of webcasts exploring the connections between the environment and human rights. Today we'll look at the challenge of water pollution in Asia. What are governments doing to protect our right to clean water? Can economic growth and sustainability coexist? Join us for the next half hour to find out. Our topic today is water pollution and its impact on Asia's economic, environmental, and human rights conditions. 9 of the 10 most polluted rivers in the world are in Asia. The region is also the source of up to 90% of the world's plastic waste pollution. What measures are being taken to address water pollution in Asia? Who, if anyone, should be held responsible? And what role do human rights protections play in ensuring action from government and industry? To provide some insights, I will be joined today by advocates and experts who've been working in the region for decades. We'll also air a short documentary on how Indonesia is making headway in rejuvenating one of the country's largest rivers, the Citarum. Now I'd like to introduce Jyotiraj Patra of Oxfam. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for having me.
Raj, the plastic pollution problem in Southeast Asia and in South Asia has been getting a lot of attention lately. And really lots of growing awareness about its impact, etc. But tell me about why you got involved. Tell me why you're so concerned with water pollution.
Yeah, so in terms of the interest in working on water and rivers, it has to do with my own student days when I was studying for a master's, and I was very close to a river, one of the largest in India, Yamuna. But you also know rivers are very close to our religion, the Hindu culture I am from. But we also saw that rivers are most polluted. So I was really intrigued by the fact that some of the holiest rivers in India are also the most polluted and dirtiest. So I was thinking in terms of what can be done in terms of combating this pollution. In the one way you are worshipping the rivers, but the other way you see a lot of garbage floating around, people still taking holy bath and dips in there. So that was kind of the starting point, I would say. But in terms of plastic pollution, we gradually realized that that's one of the major problem, and when we started working, that was less talked about. People were talking about plastic pollution mostly in the oceans, like the marine plastic pollution, but there was very little attention in terms of what is the source of that plastic pollution. And as you rightly pointed out in your introduction, out of the 10 global largest load of plastic pollution, 8 of those come from the rivers in Asia. So I think that is the region where plastic pollution is such a big issue in South and Southeast Asia. Yeah,
a big issue indeed, but we are faced with so many alarming issues. There's climate change, there's air pollution, there's deforestation, biodiversity loss. Should we be equally concerned with plastic pollution? Does it carry equal weight in terms of urgency with these other areas?
Yeah, and in fact, in my opinion, that's the most urgent issue at this point in time. As you speak, as we know, like there is a global treaty being negotiated on plastic pollution, and global leaders have come to recognize the very importance of tackling plastic pollution. And there are estimates saying that if the business as usual approach goes on in terms of not combating the plastic pollution, by 2050, there will be more fish, there will be less fish in the ocean and more plastic. So for every ton of fish by 2050, there will be 1 ton of plastic in the ocean. So I think that's very alarming. And for the very first time, earlier this year, scientists also found out microplastic, which is a degraded plastic, in human blood. So that, if not unchecked, that's going to be a major public health crisis in future. So that's the alarming situation.
I'm glad to hear that governments are getting around a treaty and governments are equally alarmed as advocates and experts like you at Oxfam. But you and I live in Asia, and you see how inexpensive plastic is, how tremendously useful it is, how many different kinds of utilities plastic has. Is it realistic that we're going to stop the use of plastic or stop it at its source, or should we be, in fact, focusing our energies on the cleanup, on the recycling, the cleanup efforts and the technologies around that?
Yeah. So I think in terms of the cleanup, that's definitely something very important in terms of tackling the plastic pollution, because the plastic which is still visible, which you and me and others can see, cleanup is definitely one of the in my opinion, the first solution we should focus more on. Also related to technologies in terms of cleaning up the river systems, looking for alternative to the plastics, in terms of packaging, in terms of fabrics and things like that. But also important for us to get more into the plastic life cycle, right from production to design to consumption and discard.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of talk, I would even call it a lot of buzz, about the importance of the circular economy. Right? But a recent study by the Zoological Society of London wrote that, quote, the global economy has become less circular over the past 2 years than in prior periods. Why is this happening? Why are we going less circular if the problem is as big as you describe and the challenge is as big as you describe?
Yes, that's absolutely true. I completely agree with the report. And another report, which is on circularity gap, it shows the world economy is 8.9% circular now, which it used to be 9.1 2 years ago. So we have gone back. We have retreated in that.
Why is that?
Yeah, so I think there are multiple challenges, the barriers to getting into circular, because if we need to understand the whole production process and the transition that needs to happen.
Yeah.
We are focusing on the production of global goods and services, the amount of resources we are consuming. To give you an example, Asia Pacific as a region consumes 50% of the global raw materials, but produces only 39% of goods. So you see the deficit, which clearly shows there is a huge circularity gap. So in terms of bridging that gap, it has to be a multi-pronged approach. And to start with, we need to have the right kind of policy regulations, incentives for different kind of corporates. And here I would like to emphasize a bit more on the role of medium and small enterprises. You were referring to the gap, and I think that is where a lot of the solution lies.
I can buy into all of that. But one thing I have a hard time believing is that these small and medium-sized enterprises, which make up over 90% of the economies of some of the countries in Southeast Asia, are actually going to take those incentives, actually be compelled by new regulations. They're just getting up and on their feet following a COVID-19 lockdowns. How do you actually incentivize small and medium-sized enterprises? How do you actually reach them, incentivize them, and get them to change the way they produce and sell things?
Yeah, so I think for that to happen, that it has to be like a two-way process. First is we need to simplify the language of circular economy. At the moment, the language used by experts, by different organizations, it look more scientific, more technical in nature. But if you want to work with the MSME and get in their political buy-in, I think we need to first simplify the language and clearly come up with a business case as to why their whole production systems need to go from the existing linear process to a more circular one. So what is the value in for them? So we have to show the value to them. Just in terms of policy regulations, in terms of standards, which is more kind of very top-down approach, often doesn't work for the small and medium enterprises. And second is to ensure they have access to finance and technology for this transition to happen. And that is not something that's happening at this point in time.
A lot of things that need to happen for us to get to the circular economy. One thing I've seen happen recently is Human Rights Council of the UN recognizing the right to a clean and healthy, sustainable environment as a human right. I think clean water has been previously recognized as a human right. Do these things matter? Do they actually make a difference to small and medium-sized enterprises? Do they make a difference to your work in raising awareness? Does any of that matter?
Of course, I think from our experience of working in Oxfam, it has affected our program a lot in a very positive way. For example, it has created an environment or awareness among different stakeholders where they have seen the whole approach to water and sanitation. Not from an infrastructure and provision, providing services kind of approach, but it is more on people. It's more on inclusion, their participation in decision making. And we also feel like this has created more awareness among the private sector in terms of ensuring how they can become part of the solution, because a lot of their production processes pollute water, as we know. But there are also industries and private sector who are leaders. For example, the global corporate leaders who are part of the water stewardship initiative.
Water stewardship initiative.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and the CEO water mandate. So these are initiatives which are already taken by some of the leading multinational corporations on corporate water stewards. Is very much aligned to how their business practices should respect communities' right. And I also see a very positive effect of this recognition of the human rights on other sectors. For example, we talk about water, but now it goes beyond water into the environment. Okay. For example, if my water I'm getting in my tap is polluted, so that is not what I'm supposed to get. So how can I reach out to the infrastructure developer and the supplier for that matter to look at the source? So how can we all work together to control water pollution right at the source?
Thank you so much, Raj. It's been
Wonderful
a pleasure.
talking to you.
Real pleasure.
Thank you.
Cheers. Now let us turn our attention to Indonesia, Southeast Asia's largest economy. As it emerges from the impact of COVID-19, Indonesia is getting back to business. But business as usual is being challenged. Public health dangers related to Indonesia's polluted waterways are calling into question the cost of rapid economic development. What is being done to protect the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment? And what is the role of civil society, industry, and government? In this short documentary, we will take a closer look at efforts to control water pollution in Indonesia's Citarum River.
Nah, statnya yang kita harapkan memang Sungai Citarum dan anak-anak sungai itu kembali secara natural berjalan dari sisi kehidupan ekosistemnya.
The Citarum is the longest and largest river in the province of West Java, Indonesia. Stretching almost 300 kilometers, the river is the lifeblood for the region, including the country's capital, Jakarta. But decades of contamination had taken its toll on the once pristine waterway, and according to a 2013 study conducted by the Blacksmith Institute, lead levels in the Citarum were found to be hundreds of times higher than international standards, while aluminum, manganese, and iron were also significantly higher than recommended levels. Elingan, a local environmental group based out of Bandung City, where many of the country's industrial estates are located, has been mobilizing local communities for the past 10 years to advocate for their rights to clean water.
Kalau limbah kimia kan toksit, artinya memang susah terurai ya, susah terurai dan berdampak terhadap kesehatan dan kehancuran ekosistem walaupun tidak secara langsung gitu ya. Kalau berdasarkan angka kunjungan masyarakat kepada puskesmas gitu ya ataupun rumah sakit, memang angka di wilayah zona industri, angka untuk penyakit kulit itu tinggi dan ISPA itu tinggi.
According to Elingan, the toxic contamination can also affect crop yield, resulting in harvest reduction. However, we are seeing signs of change. In 2018, the Indonesian government started clamping down on businesses that violate environmental laws. Elingan has since been working more closely with the state and is now part of the Citarum multi-sectoral task force, and together conduct water patrols throughout the Bandung area to identify non-compliant factories.
Sungai Citarum ibarat nadi bagi masyarakat Jawa Barat dan DKI Jakarta. Seiring dengan pertumbuhan penduduk, Sungai Citarum mengalami tekanan antropogenik yang berat. Sehingga pada tahun 2018, sungai ini dinilai telah tercemar berat dengan indeks kualitas air setara 33,43. Menjalankan amanah Peraturan Presiden Nomor 15 Tahun 2018, pencemaran dan kerusakan das Citarum ditangani secara pentahelix. Ya, kerja keras ini kemudian membawa hasil yang signifikan. Terbukti pada tahun 2021, kualitas air Citarum membaik menjadi tercemar ringan dengan indeks kualitas air 50,13. Pencapaian yang sudah baik ini masih perlu ditingkatkan melalui kolaborasi multipihak, sosialisasi, dan edukasi.
I hope you enjoyed our documentary report. Let's welcome Sagita Adasiwi, UNDP's Business and Human Rights Specialist in Indonesia. Sagita, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
Now, you were there with the film crew as they shot this documentary. What was your feeling about the government's commitment to addressing water pollution in Indonesia?
I feel that the government have quite a high commitment to promote responsible business practices, as we could see that the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs, they has been leading this national program in restoring the river, and they are also part of this national task force of business and human rights, where they have been formulating the national strategy on business and human rights. And this effort not only between the coordinating ministry, but involve another about 20 ministerials and civil society and also business association. So this is not only initiative that has been enforced by the government, but also civil society and also businesses. So I think the commitment is there, but of course we have so many challenges. But yeah, multi-stakeholder approach is really important in pushing forward this agenda.
Sugita, what other signals is the government sending about its commitment to responsible business practices in the country?
Yes, surely the government not only developing the national strategy on business and human rights, but they also establishing the subnational task force, which involving the local government from 34 provinces, and this would certainly elevate the efforts from the government. And the government also have been developing a tool for a business to assess their risk against human rights. They call it PRISMA. And this is resonant with the global movement where many countries or many initiatives has been leading into the mandatory human rights due diligence, like the recent one from the EU on the environment and human rights due diligence. So we hope the national strategy and other initiatives will also address the risk of business, including water pollution.
Sugita, thank you very much for your insights today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sean.
We now have in the studio Sushimita Mandal from the Stockholm Environment Institute and Mohamad Al-Afghani from the Universitas Ibn Khaldun Bogor. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Sushimita, let's begin with you. We've been told, or there's been an argument out there for several decades now, that with economic development comes greater environmental protections. With economic development comes wider enjoyment of human rights. But in some parts of Asia today, more and more economic development does not seem to be leading to cleaner and cleaner water. In fact, we're seeing more chemical pollution, or seemingly seeing more chemical pollution in our waterways than we have in the past. Tell me, is that fair? And if so, why? Why is this happening?
Yeah, I would agree that that's a fair judgment that you make, but I'd also like to point towards, get a little backwards on this. That when we are saying that Asia is where a lot of pollution is happening, our economies are growing, that is happening because we are catering to a global demand. We are the manufacturing hub of the entire globe. And when we are talking about being a manufacturing hub, a service hub for the entire globe, of course there will be pollution of our waterways, pollution of all kinds. There's air pollution, there's water pollution. And when we are saying this, it is in a context where the climate is changing, where the planet has reached its carrying capacity. We are already overshoot our processes in terms of the resources that we are consuming. So it is in this context that it seems to be more acute, the problem right now, because there is less water. I mean, all these resources are finite till a point, and we are not taking care of these resources, therefore they seem to be more polluted. Of course, knowledge and science is also catching up. So what we saw 50 years ago as, okay, these are products that will make our lives better, we now know that those products also have problems which are therefore causing trouble to the ecosystems, that are harming our bodies, that are making the air or the water worse for us to survive on.
And some of the awareness that's coming up now is indeed born of our own witnessing the planet's limitations. Problems are becoming more acute and more visible. But is civil society or civil society organizations have all the tools they need to keep industry and government accountable? Or is there more focus required on civil society organizations in their work?
I would say that civil society organizations have not had that much tools. I mean, their focus has been to talk about the rights and the problems that the communities on the margins face. But when we are talking about pollution, it is far larger as a problem, and it has to be looked at from a much larger lens than just the civil society organizations. And when we are talking about some of these problems, we also need to start looking at how can all the different groups that are there in the society can start working together to make this happen. The problem is also when we are talking about pollution, you and I, because we work in this sector, we encounter pollution on a day-to-day basis because of the work that we are doing. But somebody, I mean, for example, your daughter, she may not, she's drinking water because she has a filter at home, but she may not necessarily see that safe water is a concern because she gets it very easily. But today, if I, as a citizen, want to go and swim in the clogs of Bangkok, I can't do because the water is polluted. But do we really connect all those dots? It's about connecting all these dots to understand that the resource is the same resource, but we are using different technologies or different means to say, okay, this is safe water and I am safe from that. But there's a larger environment which is not safe, and we're not realizing that in the context of the environment.
Kind of blinded to the problem because we have the fresh water being piped into our homes or coming through a filter or coming out of a bottle, a big plastic bottle in the corner of the kitchen. But it makes me wonder whether when you say we need to start connecting the dots better, whether we need to invest more in technology. Don't rely on government. Don't rely on CSOs. Don't rely just on citizen awareness. Actually, we need more investments in technology. What do you think?
I wouldn't fully agree with that statement that you make, that there cannot be a single-minded focus on technology if we are wanting to solve this problem. Environmental problems are complex and they will need solutions that are multi-pronged, that are coming from different angles of the society. So technology can be one pillar of solving the problem, but it's not the entire whole in itself. So one has to look at how citizens are more aware of what they are doing, how industry is made more accountable for what they are dumping into the environment, how states can make regulatory mechanisms more strong so that they are able to monitor and focus on how to make the industries more accountable. So it's a combination of things that have to be in place, and it is really about processes, it is really about how we communicate where the problem lies.
Excellent. And Mofa, yeah, indeed, you've written a lot about technology and new chemical technologies. How do you feel about the technology fix versus a societal process, institutional fixes?
Yeah, I mean, just adding what Sushimita just said, I think there is a huge knowledge gap in terms of the new chemicals that are being created and the impacts of such chemicals. So we have maybe thousands or hundreds of thousands new chemicals being created, and we just don't know what the impacts are to human health and the environment. It could take years or decades for us to understand what the true impacts are. And then once we know, usually there will be demands for technology, and then the technology would arrive. But then my point here is that technology is always lagging behind when it comes to the new chemicals that is ending up in waterways.
And so you're making a comment actually on the capacity of regulators and others to understand what new chemical technologies are being introduced to some of these countries in Asia, in the process, in the manufacturing processes, in even the agricultural processes. Would you agree with that statement? More needs to be done in terms of government capacity?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But also government has limited capacity because we are now, for a lot of Asian countries, we're focusing on economic development. And for these kinds of chemicals, sometimes we need different kind of treatment technologies and different kinds of detection technologies for each of the chemicals that are being created. And it means a lot of investment. So I don't think we have the budget for it.
The problem is become so acute, and both of you we've already spoken to this already about how we're coming to the limits of what our planet can sustain. Mova, you wrote recently in a report for RWI that toxic contaminants in water are linked now to various cancers, behavioral and learning disabilities, birth defects, and diabetes, among other adverse health impacts. Is it so bad that we should think twice about stepping into our rivers today? Should I be keeping my own children from the river's edge?
Maybe. For example, I mean, in Indonesia, at least more than half of the major rivers are heavily polluted, and 2 of the most polluted rivers in the world is located in Indonesia. But our government is doing something about it, and it shows a lot of, so the water qualities are increasing. So, but still there are lots of problems in that regard.
You also wrote in the same report, though, that we know who's responsible. You said the extractive, agricultural, manufacturing, waste management industries. These are the industries responsible. Why can't we hold them accountable? What's keeping government from building its capacities, investigating, punishing where it's necessary?
Yeah, well, I think the problem is quite complicated. So the new chemicals are created in order to respond to human desire, and human desire has no limit. We want clothes which are waterproof, or some linens which are fireproof, and they are extra durable, and so the industry engineered these new kind of chemicals, and we don't know the impacts of them, so we have to wait some years until the knowledge crystallizes, right? So they then end up in the water course. So that's one. Of course, the Southeast Asian government, or maybe a lot of countries in Asia, is still focusing on foreign direct investment and making things easier for businesses, and so we don't allocate much of the resources in terms of environmental cleanup or capacity.
You know, in terms of the approaches to solving this problem, keeping up with the new technologies and human demand, Sushimita has been rather vocal about decolonizing some of these approaches too, not just relying on Western solutions or new technologies. What did you mean by we need to decolonize approaches to water pollution?
So it's about looking at some of these local solutions that have been devised through local knowledge systems that have developed over years, and how those can be adapted. It's not just, so those can be, you know, low cost, very context specific solutions, which are again nature based, which are not talking about focusing too much on having more energy into the system, because the moment we talk about pollution, we talk about reuse, we talk about recycling, and all of this takes also energy. Where is that energy going to come in a context where we are saying that climate change is happening, there's so much global warming happening? So we have to go back to nature and see where the solutions are there in nature, and often that is there in the majority world, and that's what I mean by decolonizing these approaches.
In the majority world, but also in coming from local communities or localities.
Yes.
Isn't that right? Well, I work for an international organization, as you know, and we're always looking for international solutions, including new international human rights recognition. As you know, the right to clean water is a international human right. Does it make any difference? Is it making a difference in this region?
It's absolutely necessary. I mean, that's giving you the framework, the moral compass on which all the other guiding principles can be set up. So if there is, I mean, I do not disagree that the UN shouldn't be there. The UN is there to ensure that we together make this happen. And therefore, those principles are your guiding principles that can help nation states to then see how do we manage, how do we regulate these resources. And that's where I think we should be moving towards. And that's a good way to look at how we can bring all of these solutions together and what is possible.
Mofo, how do you feel about that?
Well, at the very least, it will help the court in order to decide cases in which they need some kind of normative references. I mean, it comes to water, there has been a number of cases in which the court decides against towards the community in granting the awards because of the Human Rights Commission and also the right to water. And there has been some good results coming from clean air, for example, efforts through citizen lawsuit. I think we need to try to do more with regards to the water pollution through the citizen lawsuit mechanism.
Well, tell me more about that. We've heard to address air pollution as well, that we should be encouraging civil lawsuits against industry, in some cases government, to make sure that they live up to their duty of care. Is this a promising area to move the needle on water pollution?
Yes, but also depends on whether the particular jurisdiction has a citizen lawsuit mechanism, because the citizen lawsuit would mean that the judges could decide on things a bit more liberally, not too much constrained on the legalities and framework, so they can really, decide based on, let's say, the sense of justice of the community rather than the strict letters of the law, so to speak.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. A couple of things that I took away from this conversation is about the dichotomies. It's yes to international human rights, but yes to local solutions, and looking at solutions that are coming out of the majority world, as you call it. Some would call global south, the majority world. We've also talked about yes to technology. We need technology, and we need technologies to help detect new technologies that might be poisoning ourselves. But also yes to bringing people back to the source, right? And making sure my children understand where clean water actually comes from. It doesn't come from a magic spigot, yes. Right? Understanding and tying those two worlds together, I think is would be maybe the challenge of our time. And I'm just glad to have this conversation with two of the people that are working on that very issue. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
And that's been Asia in Focus, Clean Water and the Business and Human Rights Agenda. Many thanks to our guests for their participation. We hope you want to learn more by reading our upcoming report and by visiting our digital platform. Be sure to join us again as we explore climate change in our upcoming webcast of Asia in Focus. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.